Are you all set? I know we're starting to have some other people coming into the meeting. Want to go ahead and start?
Okay.
All righty. Well, good afternoon again, everybody, and welcome to another one of our series of our conversations in transportation. This is our third one of the year. And again, this is our 21st overall that we've had in the series. So again, we're thankful for everybody who's joined us for as many as you've managed to come to. Again, the usual reminders, if you have questions along the way during, please put them in the Q&A function here in Zoom. We'll get to those around 12:45 or so. And then later on this afternoon or tomorrow morning, you'll receive your PDH and evaluation forms. If you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. And we will be working on getting another one of these set up for sometime in the month of August. So you'll see an announcement for that probably sometime in mid to late July, once we get it set up in a date set on the calendar. And again, with that, I will turn it on over to Dr. Joe Hummer.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody joining us today for another conversation. Thanks to the Strategic Initiative Council and Young Members Council for sponsoring this series. Adam and Morgan, really appreciate that. And thanks to the Nixite Diamond and Gold sponsor companies who make all of this possible and really make possible a lot of what we do at Nixite. Really appreciate your sponsorship. Today we're talking about land use and in particular office space land use with Carman Liuzzo. Office space is so important to us as transportation engineers and planners because most of our peak period travelers start or end their trips at offices. And also most of us make our living analyzing traffic. Many of us make our living analyzing traffic impacts of new office developments. Carman is Senior Vice President for Investment at Highwood Properties Incorporated. He joined Highwoods in 1994 as Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and Treasurer, and remained in that position until 2003. He's a member of the Real Estate Industry Advisory Board and the Pamplin College of Business Advisory Council for Virginia Tech. Highwoods Properties is headquartered in Raleigh, publicly traded, in a fully integrated office real estate investment trust that owns and develops, acquires, and leases and manages properties primarily in the best business districts of Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, Nashville, Orlando, Raleigh, Richmond, and Tampa. So, Carman, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So let's start with the headline, the big trend, right? I guess, let me ask, is it true, in your opinion, overall in the U.S., COVID led many people to work from home instead of at an office, and that the office attendance numbers have leveled off in 2024, but they're far below where they were in 2019. Is that fairly accurate?
Yes, I'll come back to the leveled off component of that, but clearly office utilization is lower today than it was back in 19 and 20. I think the average number of days in the office, and they're very different. The work patterns are very different these days. Was 4+, not 5, but I would say just low 4 days per week. I think today that number. If you just look at Fortune 100 companies or most companies, and we see it in our properties, is the requirement's 3 on average. It may be just a little less than that, just based upon I don't think everyone's following the rules. That's been the toughest thing is, there's mandates, but they're loose. And it peaks on Wednesdays, no surprise. And you see Tuesdays next, Thursdays next, Mondays, and then Friday. Our garages are vastly different on the Monday and Friday days of the week, and we have some challenges in the garages on Wednesdays because that's the packed day, and we didn't really have a one packed day previously. So the answer is yes. utilization has been impacted. It's lower. It hasn't leveled off. I think what we're seeing is, and it's just continuing to increase, the number of companies that are mandating, which is the important component of this, mandating that you be in the office and making that requirement, 3 to 4 days a week. Again, I think it's mostly 3. I think there's very few fully remote positions. There are always some fully remote positions, but I think there's just a handful, today, at least relative to those that are required to be in on a hybrid basis.
So the other numbers that are out there and that some of us track with interest in this land use, the things like the office rental rates, office space vacancies, office space foreclosures, or new office building construction, are they generally tracking with the tenants numbers as well?
I think they've been influenced by those numbers. They're all, very, very different. So vacancy, and I think you have, in this list of questions, we're going to talk about length of office leases. We benefit from having long-term leases, and 5 to 10 years on average, probably 6 to 7 is what our average lease is at inception. And so it takes time for office usage to make its way through the leasing cycle. And you've seen, sublease space. That's when large companies will put their space on the market, hopefully to find someone else to come in and help with the economics. That's peaked in 23, and it's declining and is forecasted to decline further. But some of that's going to make its way in the vacancy. So if you just use, Highwoods, we are 12% vacant, our portfolio right now, on average. We were 90, in the low 90s back in early 2020. And so, we've seen a decline, and I think we're forecasted to see even more decline over the coming next 2 years as leases expire and companies adjust their space needs. So we're seeing that, and look, it's definitely impacting foreclosures. We haven't seen all of that yet, and that's we can almost separate the impacts of COVID demand and financial markets interest rates, in this discussion. So there's a double whammy out there, and it really depends on where you're located and what office buildings you own. You might only be impacted by the rise in interest rates and not necessarily office demand. And I'll get to that in a second as we go through this. But clearly, it's impacted all of those metrics. One of the concepts that I'll introduce and we'll talk about a little bit later is there's clearly a tiering of buildings, of office buildings, that has become even more important now versus 2019. So we'll call them tier 1, and those are buildings that have been constructed since 2015 or so. Again, these are approximate numbers. Newer buildings with amenities, well located in mixed use environments. If you look at the absorption of office space, meaning space that's been leased, 100% of it over the last several years have been in those buildings. Call them tier 1 buildings. Then you go down to tier 4, and those are call them functionally obsolete, older buildings. You hear about them with respect to conversion of to residential and other uses. Those have given away all that leasing. And very few customers go to those buildings. And so as a public company, we own 170 office buildings. We've got some tier 4s. Our goal is to have tier 1, and we'll call the second group tier 2, because they can be improved. You can add amenities. The bones are good. They're well located. They just need a little bit of lipstick. And so tiers 1 and 2s are capturing almost all the demand.
So we could see a situation in the next couple of years where people are actually building new office space, new office buildings, of the high-class tier one that you're talking about. In the meantime, in the same city, not too far down the street, there's plenty of vacant, what you're calling tier four.
I think that's right. You know, we're not sure that our crystal ball is good enough to know that it's going to be 2 years or not, but say in the next 5 years, there's going to be new construction. And that new construction is going, it could be adjacent to a tier four building, or maybe that tier four building is torn down, demolished, taken out of service, and something new. Maybe it's multifamily, maybe it's an office residential project would be built right there. I mean, you're going to see a lot of that. And one other point I'd like to make, in these tier one and tier two buildings, users of space, we'll call them customers, that's what we call them, they're not afraid to pay rent, pay a high rent. And there's been rent growth in those tier one buildings. You're not having rent growth. Obviously, you're having declining rent dramatically in some buildings in the tier threes or fours. We look at them in 4 tiers. But if you want office space today and there's demand out there, the demand's going to tier one, and those customers that want that space are willing to pay a premium to the market and a premium to most of the other office buildings in that location.
I'm going to jump ahead and follow this train of thought a little bit. Interesting to me. The tier one, you mentioned new and mixed use. Are there other amenities that customers are seeking in those tier one space? I got a mental image here of the Silicon Valley where we need a game room and a slide, right?
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of amenities. I mean, that are being evaluated. There's, I guess, common space. Where you can gather. Call it we call it customer lounge. There might be a golf simulator. There might be a bar. There might be a very jazzed up fitness center with paid yoga class, pay for yoga class, all those things. And so what we're finding is, in these newer buildings, and we're having to add them. So if it's not a new building, you're probably having to consider spending dollars in your well located but older buildings that don't have those to create demand. And so, yeah, those amenities are being added. And look, they may not have to be in the building. It could be well located, and you just draft off of the amenities that are in the surrounding submarket that are walkable. And that's why, say in this market, you're in North Hills, we have a building there. We don't have a fitness center, or we have a very small one because there's fitness there, right? And you don't need, a lot of common area. Maybe you need a conference room, but you don't need a lot of living room type space because you have that in the park. So I think, yes, you need those. And you measure the return on those amenities in the rent premium you get over, your competition or buildings that don't have that.
Interesting, because that affects us when the traffic people were looking at trip generation rates and whether people are, leaving the buildings. But sometimes the amenities they're going for in the building, and sometimes they're not. Interesting.
Hopefully they're walkable. In many cases, really to get the premium, they need to be walkable amenities, from the office space for it to really count.
And we appreciate that as the city and state, from the city and state side of things, but it's good to hear that the customers appreciate that as well. Yeah, excellent. Circle back to 2019-ish. Did anybody see this big change coming? I mean, nobody saw COVID coming, but there was, back then, there was some feeling that there was going to be a thing called Teams or Zoom, the ability like we're enjoying right now to have a webinar capability, and that was going to change how a lot of us did our jobs anyway. So did it in some way, COVID just accelerate something that was sort of happening longer term anyway?
I think it clearly accelerated. I think it just magnified the impact. I mean, work patterns change all the time. And flexibility is, a part of it. But I can tell you, in our strategic planning and all of the research that we've done with our peers and in the office industry, no one got close to predicting this level of impact where you have 10 and 15% demand reduction. And hopefully that becomes less over time because of this change.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to March 15th of 2020 here at NCDOT, we looked at our emergency preparedness plan and read it and said, oh, this doesn't apply at all to what we're doing here. Who could have saw this coming?
Yeah, we did not anticipate it. We had teams on, we were not a Zoom shop, we were a team shop. We had teams. It was a module that we paid for with with Microsoft, but we never used it. And so, we were our IT guys, we got geared up like everybody else, and we got on the teams and we used it. And we closed real estate transactions in March in a different way than we'd ever done them previously. Thanks to being able to execute it. But you can't keep doing that. I mean, I think there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that called it it's called the collaboration tax, or it was a cool term that has to do, it's the cost of not being able to sync up right with your coworkers, that you pop in the office one day physically and the folks you need to meet with aren't there. Or, you try to figure out, okay, do I text that person? Do I Teams them? Do I call them on the landline? Whatever the case may be, there's a tax to that. There's a cost to that inefficiency. And I think that's what companies are realizing. This is a pitch for office space, by the way. But you need to be in the office in order to do that, or you need to make sure it's mandatory, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Thursday, Friday, Monday, whatever the days are, to be in there to lessen that tax, the communication tax, the collaboration tax, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Good. Have office construction costs come down because of the lack of demand for new buildings at this point? Can we build one cheaper?
A little bit, not by much, not as much as we would like. We're pricing a couple of buildings right now, a build-to-suit, nothing that we would develop without 100% lease in it. But prices are not all too different today than they were a few years back. I don't think we've seen that work all the way through the system yet, because there's a lot of projects under construction. Some of them are office, a lot of multifamily. Then you have the the government hospital, all of those. There's a and you guys see it more than I do because I'm not in that business. But there's a lot of other construction going on, but we've not seen it yet.
Okay,
it needs to happen.
It figures the basic economic theory. It should happen, right? But,
right.
And then along the same lines, have y'all seen cities and counties making property tax adjustments yet on office space?
Yes, it's happening. It depends on the cycle at which they review the assessments. Wake County, obviously, this was a big assessment year, and there's an education process that's underway in terms of where values are, and the old tried and true methods of making that assessment, really require different thought these days. So, the consultants that are in that business to assist us go through that exercise, are very busy. I will tell you, I've spent more time on the phone with our tax director, property tax director, because I'm on the transaction side. I know where values are. She works through these assessments, and normally it's pretty straightforward, and it's a rising market. And now, you're having to spend a lot of time making your case that values are X, and and lower. And what's complicated is you also have this tenant dynamic. I think somewhere in these questions we're talking about, is it large customers or small customers? I mean, the real difficult customer these days, or tenant size, is the large customer. They're utilizing less space. They can rationalize space easier. They were the customers that built more or leased more space than they probably needed because of growth. Now they're going in reverse, and they don't know exactly how much space they need. And so that's creating big vacancies. Big vacancies, large vacancies, are hard to price. And when those leases are expiring in a couple of years, that impacts value today. And so we're having to go through an education process, with the local taxing authorities to explain where values are because of that dynamic. And so short answer is yes. And, a silver lining in all this is we might get some tax relief. We should across our markets over time because of lower values, which are down 25, 30, 50%, from the 2020s.
It would seem so. And then in turn, some of our members that work for cities and counties, that's not good news for them, but they'll work through that in turn.
Well, look, there are ways to equalize some of that. One, you've got to start with the assessed value, but obviously you've got to, it does impact the budget in some form, again, over time.
Yep. Let's talk about a few of those more market segments. We've mentioned a couple already, but what's your feeling about how North Carolina is faring in comparison to national trends? Charlotte and Raleigh are big markets for y'all.
Yeah, great question. And look, that's our sweet spot. And, we measure, our Sunbelt markets against the US all the time, and they're outperforming. Vacancy rates are lower. And just talk about the Carolinas, we're in Uptown Charlotte, we're in South Park and South End. And so we're benefiting from job growth. We're benefiting because those markets have newer tier 1 buildings, same as in Raleigh. We're our leasing activity in Charlotte and Raleigh really outpaces most of our other markets. Dallas is great, Nashville's great, but we think of those markets all together. But yeah, Raleigh and Charlotte are doing really, really good.
Good. What you're feeling about our office space vacancies more concentrated in the central business districts, or they tend to be spread out throughout the cities? I thought I heard a bit of an answer to that already, but
yeah. It really depends. Okay, so just take Raleigh for example. I think we have more challenges downtown or CBD here in terms of demand for space than we might have in the suburbs. And there's a school of thought that the suburbs are going to win. A few years back, everybody was like, move out office space. We don't want it in the suburbs. You want to be concentrated in the central business district or in a midtown or an urban infill location, call it North Hills here. And I think that's changing a little bit because commuting patterns, maybe a little less commute. And if you were working remote 3 days, you might want to be just a little bit closer to your, where you live, and the suburbs should, lend themselves to that. So it varies by market. We're in the central business district of Pittsburgh. That's hard to say. CBD of Pittsburgh, it's a tough one. It's a difficult commute. It has some challenges around safety, and that's been impacted by those factors, and the demand is not great. Now, a lot of office spaces in that CBD. So are companies downsizing and working more remote? Are they going to other markets? But it's impacted. Raleigh's a little bit different. Your competition is North Hills. So when we have an interest and we're competing for a customer in one of our Fayetteville Street buildings, we own 4. North Hills is North Hills is part of that conversation, right? And then the periphery, the adjacent CBD buildings, Block 83, up Hillsborough Street, that's new construction, that competes too. And so, it's different than it was in prior years where it was CBD only, and then you were competing with Raleigh downtown in the burbs. That's not the case anymore.
Right. Yeah. From, maybe city perspective, city of Raleigh, I don't know if they care, as long as the company stays within city limits. Fantastic. It's a win in that sense. But CBD is still, maybe for even general taxpayers, there's a lot of amenities there. It's where the public transportation is concentrated. We've got plazas and events. So, maybe as a taxpayer, I should root for the CBD more.
I think you should. Yeah. I think you should. Sorry to interrupt, but I think we need a vibrant CBD, right? I mean, it's state government. You've got NC State on the periphery. There's been a lot of investment and continued investment downtown. That's why we at Highwoods have made. I mean, we're adding amenities to the building I'm in right now, which is on Fayetteville Street. We're adding restaurants across the street in the Alexander Street garage, which is where we park, and others are doing that up and down Fayetteville Street, and we just need more of it. And I think you just have to take the lead, and that's what we're one of them. One of the companies that are doing that to create a more vibrant environment where we want to come and work, and we also want to stay and have dinner and all the things that follow that.
And like we were chatting before we started recording here, maybe to occasionally go live there too.
Right. Absolutely.
So, what type of employees are tending to need to show up to the office these days? Is it higher level executive or lower level clerk type people that are being mandated to be there?
Well, I'll start with, just call it call centers, customer service, that type of work can be done more easily remote. Okay. And so that's where you might have the 9 or 10% that's fully remote, out there, or maybe it's 8 or so. And then I take law firms as an example. Okay. I've heard where and by the way, they're in the office a lot. They can also measure utilization and productivity better than anyone because of billable hours and collect, that's easy. But early on in this, the administrative staff was required to be in the office because of their tasks they needed to be there to accomplish. But partners and associates might have a 3-day remote policy. But I will tell you, in most of the companies that we track and we meet with, I mean, it's the senior level, the managers are in the office, more than not. And then, I think accountants, I'm just going to go entry level, whatever, where there's an easier execution, and also tougher to recruit. It also is a factor these days. It's a tough labor market for certain lines of work. Finance and accounting is very tight. And so, we're competing, and we've got open positions here. We're 100% in the office. That's our business. So every job we post, that if you sign up, you're in the office every day. We're having a tough time recruiting accounting positions because there's a lot of other companies that are allowing either fully remote or 2 days in the office.
Yep.
So, but to answer your first question is, it really is hard to pinpoint, but and it really depends on the line of work, and it also depends on the company culture,
right?
And how you want to accomplish your mission, and if your mission is to be collaborative, then everybody's going to be in on those 3 days so that you can, or whatever your work pattern is, so that you can do your job together.
Mm-hmm. And I had read that law firms and financial institutions, companies, tended to have more of their staff coming into offices.
No question. We're seeing growth. We're seeing growth there. We're seeing, space utilization higher. Leases that when they come up for renewal are either the same size or higher, in square footage, depending on the market. But you're right there. Finance, in uptown Charlotte, big finance market. B of A, they lease 600,000 square feet in one of our buildings. Their customer facing business is in the office 4 days a week, and they're utilizing their space. Yep. And so you're correct with that assessment that legal and finance, and thank goodness they're big users of office space, are at the top of the list in terms of absorption.
Sure. And on the other hand, maybe my business, the engineer and planner, not so much. But
yes, we have a lot of leases with engineering and planning firms and architects, and we hope you're in the office, right? If you're out there.
Good. looking ahead here, for several years, and again, maybe this goes back to pre-COVID, but certainly when COVID hit, the idea of hot desking. So you know, that as a employee of a company, I would not have a particular office assigned to me that I go to every day, that I would reserve a spot and, you know, plug in my laptop and there's a monitor and here I go to my work day. Is that still a thing? Are there companies actually doing that as you observe, or has that kind of gone away?
Now, there's still the flexible component to space where, you know, there might be a section of workstations that are unassigned.
Mhm.
And you know, you come in depending on your workspace in your day being in the office, you know, you might sit in a different spot and there's, you know, an area with lockers where you keep your personal effects or what else. But I will tell you, going to if the 3 day a week on average in the office, and it's the same 3 days, there won't be a lot of hot desks, right? There won't be a lot of, you know, and I think that's good for our business in that, you know, your space needs are probably going to be generally in that same area because your peak usage is going to be on those 3 days. But I do think if you have this heavily remote component for some organizations, they're the ones who are going to have the hot desk. So the higher percentage of, you know, remote work, and the more flexible you are about which days you need to be in the office, then there's going to be the hot desking or, you know, the unassigned workspace where you pop in and you just go find you a spot to work.
And I've heard people at my agency and CDOT management kind of complain a little bit that they landed. We are up to 2 days a week can work at home, and management complaint is that we sort of landed on the least efficient solution here. That, as you're pointing out, we sort of have to maintain all of our office space because there is theoretically a peak, probably Wednesday. And on the other hand, there's a lot of days where there's hardly anybody in the building. I guess, does that complaint resonate? Do you hear that from others?
You know, we haven't. I mean, I'm not on that on the front line, so you know, our leasing team might hear that, or our, you know, the managers that are in conversations daily with those that make space decisions. But I will tell you what companies are doing. They're making a commitment to spending money in the office, in their space, and they want folks to come in. So they're not shy about spending dollars, and sometimes it's not about the rent component, because at the end of the day, I think the dollars for rent pale beside the dollars for talent. And I'm not, I told you before we started this, I'm not a statistician. I don't have all these numbers at my fingertips, but I know there's a wide margin. And so when it comes down to making the work space decision, focusing on, it's part of my book here, but, you know, focusing on where you're located, how much you spend in the office. I think the cost of that is certainly important, but it's less important than the environment you're creating for your team. Does that make sense? I mean, if it's best to have everybody in 3 days a week together, and then flexibility is important, and those are Monday, Friday, because you can grab that extra weekend, you can work remote wherever you want, and everybody feels good about that benefit, then you don't, and you retain your employees, then you don't mind paying that premium to have the same amount of space to be there.
Whatever increases our productivity.
Right.
That's it. That's bottom line. Yeah, no, that resonates. I appreciate that. I see we got one question in the Q&A. Appreciate that. If others, if you're participating today and have a question for Carman, please don't hesitate. Type it into the Q&A and we'll most likely get that addressed. One of our stalwarts, Ed Johnson, asked a question. Are you aware of any peak spreading strategies underway or envisioned to lower Wednesday peaks into other days? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware of any though, although I think it's beginning to rear its head, and we're seeing it in our parking garages, where we're at capacity, and companies are having a hard time getting out of the garage in some places. I mean, it's just things that we didn't feel like were going to be challenges. But at this point, I don't know that they're going, if they're 3 days a week, I don't think companies are going to give up the Monday, Friday. Maybe it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or they vary the teams so that you can lessen the peak, from the peak Wednesday. But I mean, we have a garage in Charlotte that is, we have 2 office buildings that are serviced by that garage. It's 3,000 spaces. If you're familiar with Uptown Charlotte, you've got the Honeywell building there. That also feeds through one of the exits from that garage. And Wednesdays, my son works in that building, one of those buildings, and you're calling him, I'm on the 4th level, and it's 6 o'clock, and I'm still lined up to get out. It's just, those are things that we as building owners are going to have to be mindful of. And I know there were some questions earlier about, well, how do you size garages these days or not? That's a whole different ball game. We don't have an answer yet, but we've got a lot to figure out. But I do think this Wednesday peak, I'm sure it's on a lot of folks' radar, but I've not heard of any specific strategies yet to reduce it.
Good. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ed and Carmen.
Good question.
It was. And we got a couple others coming in, Zach and Todd. Appreciate that. We're both kind of on the same theme here. So do you see any potential transitions coming in from office to residential?
Yes. It's complicated, and we have probably 4 across our portfolio that we have either evaluated and thrown in the towel, or we are considering for the next couple of years. So we have one that we have a 300,000 square foot vacancy in Pittsburgh, and call it half the building in the block of vacancy worked with the elevator bank. So we considered that, and I'll use this example because the bones of the building, the elevator setup, the window lines, the depth, everything that you would consider, whether it worked or not, we checked all those boxes. Okay. We went to and spent money on design with a consultant who's done conversions in Dallas and been very successful with them. So there's been a handful in downtown CBD Dallas that have been successful, off the chart successful. So we hired this consultant. We went through the math. We bid out all the work. Contractor built, sized the units, went through that, had a plan that worked physically. The right number of units, everything, the right amenities. And then we priced it. Okay. And then we ran through the economics because of where multifamily return hurdles are for Pittsburgh. What return would a developer need in order to build that spec multifamily? No leasing, but physical structure. And it didn't work. Well, it might have worked if we'd given them our building square footage in there for 0 or less. And even then it might have been tough. So the math didn't work. We're working on one in Atlanta in the burbs. That is a building that's going to be vacant, Georgia Department of Revenue. And our developer in Atlanta, and the bones work. It's a high rise. It's fully available, and at a number that works for us and them. And they're working through it. And you need help from the municipalities. In many cases, you need incentives, and they're going to get some. And we feel like that has a chance. We're not there yet. Okay. But that'll be 200 plus units. And then we have 2 other locations that we are there's a really good chance that we'll demo the suburban office building because the land value for townhomes or resi, and I'll call that a conversion. It's really not a physical conversion, but those are going to potentially come out of stock and will be something other than an office building. But it's tough. I mean, I think, the articles about conversions, they're all over the place. But I think the realization now is that it's going to take time, and we also need the capital markets to help.
And if I'm hearing you, that maybe the biggest hurdle in general is that the cost of the housing costs are still too low. There's too much competition out there at a price point that the conversion can't meet that.
Well, I think it's with the return hurdle, what it requires for an investor to jump in and make those, invest $100 million or $75 million to develop this conversion. They didn't work, and the rents were, the rents were good. I mean, they were market rents, and they had increased over time in Pittsburgh. I'll use that example, but they weren't high enough to give them the return they needed. And the construction costs, which we talked about earlier, which we hope would be lower, weren't.
Good. Thanks, Zach and Todd, for offering that question. If others, if you got anything else on your mind, put it in the Q&A. Is there? We talked about office to residential. Is that the only kind of conversion that matters at scale? There's really nothing else we can do with a vacant office space.
There's office to the life science. We've evaluated that, and we own some properties in the Raleigh market that might be suitable for a life science conversion. It's expensive, more expensive than a resi conversion, so it's a big bet. And we wouldn't do it. We would hope that we would be able to find an investor who would want to buy our office building and do that.
Yeah.
But there are office buildings that are suitable for conversion to life science. There's also hospitality. We evaluated a building in downtown Nashville. It's actually a pretty cool case study. It was one of the best buildings in CBD Nashville. Just happened to be located down in the bridal party hotspot, the tourism section. If you've been there recently, and it's just hot every day, is busy, and it impacted the commuting pattern. It impacted the ingress and egress for that office building, and so we're losing some large customers because of that traffic complication. We evaluated the conversion of a portion of that building to a hotel with a very sophisticated hotel developer, a high-end deal. It's just same thing. The cost, the building worked, the design worked, but the costs were so significant that return hurdles for both us, the office owner, and the hotel developer did not work. But we're swinging. Anytime we have a large vacancy, we'd love to lease it for office, but we run in parallel tracks. If it works, for a conversion, or if there's enough space, we evaluate that.
Yeah.
So there are other conversions: hospitality, life science, lab, and then residential.
Good. Hey, it's good to have several tracks there, several options. A couple of years ago, there was also it seemed like a trend toward office memberships. I'm going to mention the WeWork as the one that I know of, but there are other companies in that area. So I buy a membership, pretty reasonable price, monthly payment. I got somewhere to work now that's not at home when I want to step out. A little social activity perhaps thrown in. That seemed like it was going to be an attractive competition. And then it seemed like the moment passed for those again. Any thoughts on those office memberships these days?
Sure. They're still out there.
Yeah.
We operate one in our building here in downtown Raleigh ourselves called the Commons. There was just so much of that space that was leased. Okay. If you look at the absorption of space, and you know how these companies work, WeWork or Industrious or Regis Spaces, they sign a lease with us, the landlord, and then they do the leasing to, monthly, 3 years, short-term leases, with the sub customers.
Yep.
They absorbed too much space, frankly. Even if the market had stayed great, they absorbed a lot of space, signed a lot, too many leases. There's still a need for flexible space, and I honestly think that need today is just as important, or is just as high as it was back then, because of what we've just talked about here, flexibility. And if you want swing space, you can go get it in that same CBD or midtown location or suburban location, temporary space, while you're fully occupying your office. Or smaller companies might want the flexibility because they're only coming in, two or 3 days a week. So yeah, it's out there. I mean, we have 2 or 3 or 4 companies that have come to us where we have floors of space and ask us about, potentially converting those. Or the space that we took over in this building, in the Wells Fargo building, was built out by Industrious. Okay. That's a WeWork competitor. And they decided this location didn't work for them. Well, we elected as a landlord to slide in, rebrand it, and we're operating it as co-working space or flexible office space right now. And I think we're 60%, 50 to 60% leased right now, which is good. I think there's still a need, maybe just less of it than what was consumed by WeWork in particular back in the heyday.
Yep. Okay, good. That was sort of my perception too. I'm glad to hear that was not off base. Got a question that came in from Zach, and it was one that was love when this happens. He's anticipating what I was going to ask anyway. Thanks, Zach. Zach says, have there been changes in office lease structures to unbundle parking costs? For example, I believe our lease includes around 180 parking spaces. On the low demand days, we don't reach that. On the high demand days, we exceed that. And then he goes on. So, generally, have there been changes in how office is bundled with parking?
Answer is yes. I mean, I think what we're seeing is it's unbundled. We're moving in that direction. I guess just so I'm clear in the definition, bundled is you sign a lease, it's paid parking, but it's built into the rental rate, and you get 180 cards, and you use those cards. You're paying for them, and you have access to the garage using those cards. Unbundled is you still have rights to spaces, but you get your cards, and they're paid for separately, either by you, the building, the customer, or the individual worker. But here's what we're seeing happen, and we're offering this, is you might have a need for, in your example, 100, you may have 180 cards, but you may have a need, let's use 180 spaces. We'll give you 240 cards, or so you give 240 employees their cards. You pay for 180, but the day you go over 180 to 181, you're paying a full daily rate for that park. 182 in there, then it's the daily rate for that user. Now, what we've got to figure out too is float or oversell in our business, right? You might have more cards out there than you have physical spaces, because that on any given day, 20% of the people aren't going to be there. We're having to figure that out. That's the Wednesday complication. But you also know, if the deck is full, if you're a monthly parker, you've got a space. If you're the 180, but once you go over that, you may not be able to park, or it's creating, we're having to have a valet or concierge in order to manage that. So yeah, we're getting creative because our customers are asking for this. We want to pay for X, and we know that X is going to be our number that's going to be in there, but we want to allocate X plus something to our employees and give them a card They
Mhm.
just know that on one day when they show up, we're going to get a bill for a daily rate. And the parking technology, in most cases, in our garages will allow you to do that, to create that bill. You get in the garage and you just know we're at the end of the month, we're going to tally it up the days that you were over 180.
Do you see any movement, any of your customers that are allowing their employees instead of a free parking space, that they'll just provide a transportation voucher of some sort, or a transit pass in lieu of parking space?
I'm not that close to it, Joe, but I'm confident that that happens in the in the urban markets where you have access to that, and where you have paid parking. Look, we've got a lot of the vast majority of our buildings right now are surface park free parking. In CBD Raleigh, in Pittsburgh, in Dallas, in Uptown Charlotte, in Tampa downtown. That's where you have paid parking. And I'm sure there's some vouchers perhaps going on there. Maybe not in Dallas because everybody has a car and they're driving right in that market. It's a suburban and they're getting it in the garage.
Yeah. That's been the hope of a lot of, especially transit advocates for the past decades. And
we've not seen a lot of it because I think customers are asking for the same, and maybe because they can get it, the same parking ratio, the same numbers, rights to the same number of spaces. We've seen that decline a little bit, but not by a great deal.
Yeah. And along those same lines, in North Hills, I mentioned to you before that I live right near there these days. It's a great, what you call BBD, but Better Business District, but poorly served by buses, almost no way to walk or bicycle in and out of North Hills. And do customers recognize that? Is that sort of, a factor that helps steer somebody toward a CBD and away from a North Hills type out in the suburbs?
Well, I think, congestion that can't be alleviated by, public, some form of transportation that's going to public transportation will allow fewer cars. I think it's going to push users to the less congested markets. Haven't seen that yet in North Hills. They're still doing. I mean, that's all the buildings haven't been occupied yet, but when they do, I think it's going to be challenging. The other thing I'll say too, just while we're on that topic, is how you think about shared parking uses, right? I mean, and that happens all throughout North Hills. That's what's prompted it is, these apartment users that are working remote that you used to could count on sharing parking efficiently between resi that's leaving, during the day to go to work somewhere else. And you've got, the office users might be able to absorb some of those spaces. That calculus is changing. And again, we don't know what it is yet, but you have to be thoughtful about how you allocate parking if you're in a mixed use environment.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's good. It has, you mentioned South End Charlotte before. The light rail in Charlotte makes a good difference in the office market there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure many of you've been there recently, but the number of office buildings, resi's started, multifamily started there, and that's grown. But the number of corporate users, commercial office development that's up and down the light rail has really changed Charlotte, in my view. And what it's done is it's pulled the office center of gravity from what used to be Trade and Tryon, all the way down to where we're located. Thank goodness, Legacy Union right there at 277, across from the South End, and then now into South End. And so all the foreclosure issues in Charlotte, the distressed assets are uptown, Church Street, but going back toward what used to be the core. That's where the challenges are going to be. They're not going to be in, they won't be in South End. They won't be in the uptown area that's closest to, 277.
Interesting. And then how about the bus rapid transit? There's a bus rapid transit open in downtown Richmond, and of course, Raleigh is just about to go under construction, first BRT line. Do you get a sense of that? Does that make a difference? Will it make a difference out into the future?
I asked this question to our market leader in Richmond. We own we own one building in the CBD, and we own a bunch out in the west end, the suburbs. What she indicated that the ridership is very low that on the BRT in Richmond. And again, it might be, just sort of right now, CBD Richmond is tougher than many of ours. We only own one building there. And so I think that's influenced it. But all she said was the ridership has been lower than they anticipated in that market.
Yeah, and jury's certainly still out in Raleigh. We'll see literally how things develop there. Carmen, we're a couple minutes out here. Anything we didn't ask you that any kind of last thoughts you want to convey to our group here?
Really just to emphasize that, the market that we're in, I think we've seen the bottom. Okay. And we didn't really talk about capital markets here today. So not that that's my area of expertise, but those are beginning to loosen up. Okay. They're beginning to be transactions out there. And I think, the headline, and I would also say the ratio of positive headlines about returning to the office trades happening, investment activity. And then just the positive articles way outnumber the negative ones. So that, to me, that's the trend. And then I would just say Highwood share price, we're a public company. The market's efficient out there, has improved dramatically over the last 4 months. So I think the public market is smart. And I think that's also, sort of a positive for us, a green shoot.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to ask you about that, but I'm glad you brought it up anyway. It's good. It's also a good measure.
Yeah, I've got some harrowing data on that. I know you're right. I'll tell you this. When we went public, we were $21 a share, priced at what call a 10% cap rate. COVID in 20, we were $52 a share. Okay, at a 6% cap rate. Great pricing. Now we were at 21 for a long time in the last 2 years. At the same cap rate we were when we went public in 94. Now we're back up a little bit better. We're inside of 10 at 2650. So that's a good barometer of what the public market thinks about office in the Sun Belt.
And in turn, how we in our transportation engineering and planning should be thinking about it over the next few years. So
because they are a leading indicator. I mean, that they know what the public smart, public market.
Yeah. We're going to call it there. Carmen, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I expect our participants did as well. And before I turn it back over to Andy, I want to say again, thanks to our sponsors, companies that sponsor Nixite. We really appreciate what you do. And to the strategic initiatives and young member councils for sponsoring this particular series. Before I turn over to Andy, I'll say see you in August with another conversation. And in the meantime, let's keep talking transportation.
Thank you.
Andy, back to you.
All righty. Again, thanks to both of you. That was a great conversation. And we'll send out an announcement for the next one of these. It'll be in August. Once we get the date on the calendar and the guests finalized, we will send that announcement out. So keep an eye out for that. You should get your PDH and evaluation forms this afternoon. And again, thanks for attending. We hope to see you again.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Carmen, superb. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're most welcome. I'm happy to participate. I hope that was what you guys were expecting, the right level of content, but again, glad to do it.
All right. Right on. And I always come out of this, and it's certainly true this time, and say, I wish we had another hour.
Yep. You're happy to share my contact information if you like. it's on our webpage too, but if, again, there might be other questions, I'm happy to take them after
Good.
too, if that's okay.
Good. We really appreciate that. Yep. And I think I'm having lunch with Joe Milazzo next week, so I will pass along my thanks to him too for making this contact. And yeah, it's
You got it.